And welcome once again to The Comfort Zone from Elect Bible Ministries. My name's Steve Criscole, and the aim of these vidcasts, it's kind of it's not just to encourage or to inspire you, but it's also here to challenge you maybe, and maybe teach you a little something along the way. So let's begin then by asking you a question. What is your most prized possession? Is it your house, your car, maybe some fancy jewellery? Now, I'd like you to be honest. Did you think it's my children? Now, for those of you who don't have children, sorry, this is all about the children. Well, almost all anyway. So perhaps you didn't think of your children as possessions. Maybe. Well, maybe if you didn't, maybe now might be a good time to start. What do you think? Because they are our responsibility. You know, the buck stops here, so to speak, at the parents, with us. Never mind what the government might tell you. Yeah? We bring them into this world and, well, we've been blessed by God to be able to create a life. So, you know, then we are the ones who we feed them, we teach them, we chastise them, and we love them. Or we're supposed to. It isn't up to the school or social services, although, you know, they seem to be under the misguided impression that they have the ultimate control over our children. I've got a news flash for them. They don't. It's down to us. Whether you plan to have children or not, whether you want them or not, they're your responsibility to protect them, to nurture them. And that includes also babies not yet born in the womb. Now, when you look around at society today, perhaps you can see, you know, the many problems that children face, and you say, well, you know, it's not our problem, it's today's society, that's the problem. Well, you know, we can blame society and the powers that be as much as we like, but in the end, well, each of us must take responsibility for everything that happens in our lives. All too often, our mistakes in life, they have a serious effect on our children. Let me give you one example, you know, of how a person who can make mistakes and they can impact the lives of just so many other people. So I'm sure most people have heard of an American singer, well, people of a certain age anyway, an American singer, her name was Whitney Houston. Now, she made quite a number of songs, she was very popular, and she made a song called "The Children Are Our Future." Now, from the title and the first verse, the sentiments, they sound really great, they sound sincere, and it begins like this. It's okay, I'm not going to sing, don't worry. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Great. You might say, well, that's great, but hang on, wait a moment, because it goes on to say something else. She says, the greatest love of all is easy to achieve. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. Wow. Wait a minute. Hang on. The greatest love of all is to love yourself. What happened to the kids? How does loving yourself help them? You know, psychologists, they have a name for this kind of self-centered attitude. It's called narcissism. Anyway, this completely mixed up woman, she had a world stage, you know, to use to give some positive messages, yet she chose to sing about her own obsession with herself. Anyway, things didn't end well for Whitney as she spent her confused life taking drugs and finally drowning in her own bath. She had millions of fans, she was adored, and in fact she was a pretty good singer really. So that meant mixed up, confused, self-centered messages, they were listened to and taken in by her adoring fans. Now, I think this song, and people like Ms. Houston, they sum up a whole host of mistakes that people make in their lives today. They can see that children are important and they kind of represent their future, but that's as far as it goes. It seems to get lost, this idea, in this modern day passion for self-obsession. While these celebrities, they pump out their confused and sometimes evil garbage, they promote themselves at every opportunity. But they can hardly be what I might call a positive role model, for vulnerable young minds. So, who do you think should be a good role model for children? Well, I'll leave that one for you to ponder. You can think about that after we finish watching this. But for now, I'd just like to consider how you are in your own family. Are you a good role model for your kids? I mean, what is it you teach them? What kind of values do you teach them? Do you give them, the freedom to do as they please? To mix with whomever they like? Do you let them watch just about any movie or play any video game? Or maybe you agree it's good for your kids to know that there are now over 120 different identities that they can choose to self-identify as. Perhaps you're one of those parents that follows the so-called global climate catastrophe, and you encourage your kids to save the planet. What about race? Do your kids follow your lead and demonize just about every historic figure simply because they don't fit with, current misguided worldviews on racism? Or maybe you just sit back and let the kids soak up any and all modern progressive thinking, no matter how bizarre. Well, I just want to ask you a question. Did you know that today's Western society is now closely aligned with Marxist communist ideology? I'll bet you didn't, but it's true. Of course, that's okay if you happen to be a Marxist. But what about everyone else? Do you want your children to have a future that looks a lot like I don't know, Soviet Russia or today's communist China? So, as a parent, if you take your role seriously, then you have a great responsibility. So if you look beyond the mainstream media, past the propaganda, the half-truths, and have a look at the real world, you will see that the value of life, it's become a cheap commodity to be bartered for or cast away like so much garbage. When it comes to children, it's actually sickening to me to realize that in our world today, there's so much tolerance for the abuse of children in all manner of evil and depraved activities. Well, I've got news for all those who are still confused. Well, or even as confused as Miss Houston, anyway. The greatest love of all is, in fact, the love of God for His children. Now, in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, Moses was reminding the Israelites about the 10 laws, those commandments that God gave them to follow. And in the next chapter, Moses goes on to tell the Israelites something else. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 to 7, King James Version. And it reads, "And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." God really wanted the children, and everyone, to be taught His laws so that they knew them inside and out. He wanted the children to grow up with a solid foundation of moral attitudes, which put God first and a deep respect for others next in their lives. But that's not how it is today. Our children are in big trouble. These precious little people, they need your help. They desperately need to be taught about the deep love that God has for them. But before the children can know all that, the parents need to know it first. You see, God loves us all so much. Now, some people might sneer at that. Well, let's just try and flesh that out a little bit. Maybe you remember or you've heard the story about Abraham from the Old Testament. How God told him to take up his one and only son, that's Isaac, take him up a mountain and sacrifice him as a burnt offering to God. And of course, Abraham obeyed. I mean, he loved and trusted God so much that even though he thought he would never have a child, really, because of his age, and he was very old, quite advanced, still God gave him Isaac as a child. Abraham, he trusted God so much that, well, he was prepared to sacrifice him, just as God had told him. You might remember, actually, that in the story, right at the very last second, God stopped Abraham's knife hand. Now, this was a test for Abraham, but it was also something else entirely. You see, there's a parallel with the story of Jesus in this story. God sent Jesus, his only son, to earth to ultimately be a sacrifice. His only son, remember that. He knew that Jesus would suffer terribly, but he went through it with him anyway. He didn't do that to be cruel or sadistic. He did it for you and me, because he loves us so much that he was prepared to sacrifice his only son to pay the price for our sin, so that we don't have to. Well, the story of Abraham, it was written several thousand years before Jesus. Yet it's a story that foreshadows the life of Christ. It shows us the amazing love that God has for us, his children. And what God does for his children, we must do for ours. You know, this world that we live in, it's got any number of deceptions, so many lies, so much confusion. Everywhere you look, there's greed for power and money, and these are the things that fuel the evil of this world. So I just want to finish this by saying to you, don't be deceived. Nurture your children, give them love and a sound family life. Teach them according to the laws of God and show them God's love. Because remember, the children, they really are our future. So that's the end of today's message. Thank you very much for joining me, and hope to see you next time. God bless. For now, bye.